All right. Hello. Hello. This is Abel Pacheco, your host for the Five Talents podcast. We are super excited today. We have Mr. Clive Davis on the show with us. Clive, how's it going, man?
It's going great, man. Thanks for having me on.
I'm super pumped. I'm excited. I've been waiting to have a recording with you for some while. If you don't know Clive, he is the founding principal of Park Royal Capital. And man, they have hundreds, I'll say 100+ million dollars, $135 million under assets under management, several, properties, commercial properties in his neck of the woods, and we'll talk about it. And they are doing all kinds of really fun stuff to talk about today on our show. Land entitlement, development, 90 acres they're working on, number of deals that are in flight. Maybe some of them we can't discuss at this moment, but man, we're super excited to have Clive on. He's going to be a great conversationalist, and we're going to have some new educational points to talk about, some insights. And, I'm sure, it being March 2023, we'll have some fun stuff to talk about the market as well. So give everyone a market update, but just want to say thank you. So Clive, thank you for joining. And man, maybe we can start here. Just, tell us in your own words, tell us who you are and what you do, and we'll start a great conversation here, man.
Sure. So I tell people that I am a recovering lawyer. I started out as a corporate transactional lawyer at a Wall Street firm. That's how I got my start out of law school. And then I made the transition into the pharmaceutical industry, starting out as a lawyer for Pfizer,
Wow.
whose name is in the news for all the right reasons recently. So I started with them. They actually ended up relocating me from New York to Atlanta, which is how I made the transition more than 17 years ago now. I moved down to Atlanta from New York, New Jersey area, and continued with them, and then left them and joined another company and became a chief compliance officer for a Belgian pharma company. So all in all, I had a 20-year corporate career. 15 of those years or so were dedicated to the pharmaceutical space. And at the end of 2016 is when I asked myself the question, if not now, when? And the question I was asking is, you've had an interest and a passion for real estate for the entirety of those 20 years. You've always had this flirtation with what would it be like to be an entrepreneur? And so when are you going to give combining those two interests a shot? And so at the end of 2016, I said, I've put in 20 years, I've done well. I can always kind of fall back on, a well-paying job and give this a shot and see where it goes. And that was a little over 6 years ago. And fortunately, I've not looked back. And I've just been on the path of immersing myself in the commercial real estate world, focused primarily on multifamily and acquiring those assets. And more recently, venturing into the development world. And we'll certainly talk a little bit more about that.
All right, man. Well, that sounds great. A recovering lawyer, then also a chief compliance officer, and working for Pfizer. Man, you've done a few things. You had a very successful professional career, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah, it was certainly rewarding. I tell folks that I was, blessed to be well compensated throughout most of those years. The flip side of that is I also tell people, regardless of how highly compensated you are, you cannot pass on a W-2 income to your heirs.
There you go,
and
man.
so
It's a trip, right? It's we work so hard. We get so much success, achievement, accomplishment, teamwork, all of these really great things from the W-2 world, especially if, you're bringing teams together, you're building something. But if you don't have ownership in it, it is something we cannot pass on. And it's a hard paradox, right?
Yeah. So if you're interested, like I am, and I know you are, Able, if you're interested in creating generational wealth, you got to think about how can you use that W-2 as a foundation or a launching pad for you to get involved with things that are going to ultimately contribute to creating generational wealth. And that's where my head was at, at the end of 16 and 17.
Yeah.
And, I just took the leap of faith.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Congratulations. And we did, something similar. We were in tech in the professional world for years and years and years. And, all the way through, we invested slowly in real estate. And, eventually me and my wife decided, okay, well, she became the real estate professional first. She left her full-time job, and then I left a full-time job. And, through that process, slowly but surely, we didn't come from money. We don't have, a ton of people educating us, showing us how, and we kind of picked this up. But slowly but surely, you start adding your net worth to each deal you close, and you got a little interest here, a little membership equity here, a little bit of, some investment return there, and it starts to add up. I guess the difference is, when you don't go to work, it still accumulates, it still builds up. And one of my buddies told me the other day, he goes, man, you know what I like about you is you work to invest. You're not just working, to spend. And, I think that's the key principle there, just really trying to figure that part out. So, let's dive in a little bit, if we can, for those that have never met you or worked with you, or just really never heard, Clive, how did you grow up? Did you grow up around money? Were your parents discussing money? Did they have it? Did they help you with it? What's the insight to your background?
Yeah, sure. We can go there. So I'm an immigrant to this country. I was actually born in London in the UK to Jamaican parents who had migrated from Jamaica in the early 60s when Jamaica was still a part of the British Commonwealth. Okay. And so my father went there to London in 1960. My mom followed in 61. And they made, life in the UK. And, for them, it was, my father tells me, I thought I'd be there 3 to 5 years. I thought the streets were paved in gold. I figured I'd make my riches and then return back to Jamaica. It took him 24 years before he got back to Jamaica. And obviously he had me and other children there. And so we come from, very humble beginnings. Neither of my parents went beyond grade school education at the time. My father, although he was capable of it, if you didn't come from a family with money, you didn't have money to buy uniforms, to buy books, all of the things that you need at that stage. You just, high school wasn't even an option for you. So it was always instilled in me that education was a good thing that would open doors up to me that weren't necessarily open to them. I grew up with my father and my mother most of my life working 16-hour shifts, and I thought everyone's parents work 16-hour shifts. And it wasn't until later in life that I realized, there's an 8-hour shift that you can work. And so, come from a humble background, but, my mom in particular was a fighter. It was her idea in 1978 to go to New York in pursuit of the American dream. So she actually left the family and went to kind of lay the foundation. She worked, she was a nurse's aide, she cleaned houses. And then 5 years later, she was ultimately able to reunite the family and bring us to the US. And that's how we settled in the US. So first immigrants to the UK and then the US. And, with a 4th grade education for her, she was able to buy 3 homes. I recall being a kid in New Jersey, going to Queens, New York on the weekends with my father to basically be a handyman at one of those houses that my mom had acquired in Queens and had it rented out. So we were doing wallpapering, painting, handyman stuff, cutting down trees and just, and my father and I, we'd be in a sleeping bag, just working on the house. And so that was probably my first.
That was the first
foray into kind of real estate and knowing, you can own something that you don't live in and then someone else lives in it. And so I had that exposure. I also had kind of the negative side of it, because at one point we had a family living in the house who thought that they shouldn't have to pay their rent.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about kind of housing laws in New York, it can be many, many months before you can get someone out, even when they're not doing what they need to do, i.e. paying their rent. And so, I think for the better part of 9 months plus, we had a non-paying family who was living there, and we were back and forth in court trying to get them out. So
how old are you when you were doing this?
Yeah, so I was probably, I'd say 13, 14, in that range. And, I got that exposure, it wasn't high scale or anything like that, but nonetheless, it told me that, you can own something and derive value from it. For me, it was very, very tangible, and, it wasn't foreign to me to own a rental property. So you fast forward from that to me buying my first investment property, which was a duplex down in Florida. I was working in New York, still at the law.
How old were you then?
Yeah, so at the law firm. So I was probably 26 or 27.
Okay.
And I
working
was
in law. You've already gone to school. You've already gotten your law degree. You're practicing, but something here says, I still have to be an owner.
Yeah. So, and there was a very specific why behind it. So my parents had retired from New Jersey down to Florida, Cape Coral, Southwest Florida. And, what I decided to do, one, I saw that there was a prevalence of these multi-units, these duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. And so, owning real estate is something that, if you're coming from a Jamaican background, regardless of your education, your income or whatever, you aspire to own some kind of real estate, certainly the home that you live in. And if you can do better than that, you go for it. So for me, neither of my parents had any fancy retirement plans. I joke that the children are the retirement plan. So that's why they had as many children as they had. So, but me being the youngest in the family, the first to go to college, the first to go to grad school, the first to go to law school, the first to do a lot of things, I thought I took it upon myself to buy the duplex in the community that they retired into. And then what I did is I opened up a checking account. I put both of their names on it. I had the rents going into that account. So the plus or minus $1,000 a month that it was kicking off, I had going into an account. And I basically told my parents, look, when you need something, don't ask me, just go get it from your account. And so, it gave them a sense of independence in that, they weren't having to, here and there ask me for stuff. I would just be like, look, stop asking, just go get it from your account. That's your account there.
Yeah.
And so, that's how I got started. I was largely hands off. Like I said, full-time job in New York. I was, certainly focused on that. And I was able to kind of get into real estate investing. And so I held that property all the way until 2018. So 2 years into me stepping away from corporate life in 2016, I sold that property. And that property ended up actually helping sustain me as I was 2 years away from having had a W-2, savings being depleted and kind of reserves being depleted. And so I was able to sell that duplex in 2018. The proceeds basically helped sustain me, helped kind of take care of my responsibilities, all while I continued to pursue the aspiration of breaking into this large scale multifamily world.
Yeah. Let me pause you right here, because this is a question I get asked quite a bit. How did you transfer or transition from corporate work to full-time real estate? And that transition from corporate to full-time, for me was pretty similar. Me and my wife invested in single family houses for years while I was working at my full-time W-2 job. We did that, and at some point we finally had enough. It was seemingly enough around the same time line 2018, 2019, where we started either refinancing some of the single family properties and or selling them. And that was a little bit of cushion that we needed, about a year's worth of expenses, to say, you know what, I have enough to take this leap and move from single family to commercial, and also from the corporate W-2 job to full-time real estate investor. So that's definitely one route. And to hear you say it, I guess it's a common one.
Yeah, so I would say the first thing is getting up the courage to step outside of my comfort zone. So when you've been in a corporate role or corporate setting for 20 years, and you get that direct deposit that hits without fail every 2 weeks, that you get into a comfort zone, and there's a little bit of complacency about, well, why would you disrupt this good situation? So there's definitely a mindset adjustment around surrendering the safety, or what you perceive as safety, of kind of a corporate gig, a corporate job, for kind of the unknown, which is the world of entrepreneurism. And so for me, I wasn't as smart as you. I didn't think through it as well and plan through it as well. I knew I had reserves that would get me by for some time. And also, the other thing I tell people is, with every year where my salary and compensation improved, my lifestyle did not creep up to match the new compensation. So I generally lived for most of those 20 years below my means. And so when I got ready to step away, the only debt that we had was debt collateralized by real estate, which is by definition good debt in my view. Yeah. And so we didn't have car notes, we didn't have vacation homes, we didn't have a bunch of toys or things that we needed to wean ourselves off of. We basically continued living the same lifestyle for the most part. It was the first time in my adulthood where I saw more money leaving my household than was coming into my household on a monthly basis. Yeah. And that took some adjustment. And when you've not been in that situation since the age of like 17, 18, and all of a sudden you're seeing more money leave your pocket and your household on a monthly basis, that takes some adjustment, and you've got to resist the temptation to do what is easy, which is, let me just go get a 6-figure job. Because I knew at any point I could do that with my experience, with my skill set and background. I knew that I had that as a safety net, that I could probably go find a 6-figure job. It wasn't going to be something I was passionate about or anything along those lines. But nonetheless, my family was going to eat, the bills were going to be paid, and our responsibilities were going to be taken care of. But you've got to resist that temptation. And so,
it's a difficult. And then let me pause you here too, because I think you said something earlier that made a lot of sense. And just to point it out, so if you're a parent and you're raising your children and you're listening to this right now, trying to figure out, well, what are the things that I should be teaching them for the future? And Clive, I definitely heard you got something from your parents, which is, hey, education is important. We got to do that. And so you achieved, you accomplished, you succeeded there, started the professional. But, when you were younger, you learned through that, hey, I've got to own something. I've got to experience that. You had that experience. So whether they were purpose or intentional or not, the seed was planted in you early on that you've got to figure something out outside of that W-2, outside of that corporate world, outside of the good paycheck. And you got to figure out how to build or create some wealth that could be, generational. So I think that's something that if you're a parent listening, those lessons are so important today. Everyone's financial situation is different, whether you have to go to work or not. But the point is those lessons, for your children, and then, them to pass on. And we're all trying to better up one generation from the next, right? So even the education and passing it down obviously had an impact on you, and, want to impact your children as well.
It's a great point. And at the end of 2016, one of the things that I was concerned about was I modeling the behavior that I wanted to, I have 4 children. at the time, my oldest was
Four.
probably, yeah,
Congrats.
at the
Congrats.
time, my oldest was probably 6 months away from heading off to college. And so
Hmm.
when I was asking myself that question I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
part of that question was also, are you being somewhat of a hypocrite? Because I've always raised my kids to say, one, you can do anything that you want to do, and you should pursue your passions. And
Yeah.
so, I was feeling like, all they've seen of me is me being a corporate employee, a W-2 employee. They may be getting the wrong impression or idea that you have to go this route and you need to
Yes.
spend 10, 15, 20 years in this world before you go do what you're truly passionate about.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was important for me to model, look, you can be an entrepreneur. And so they got to see, especially the younger ones, they got to see more of an entrepreneurial dad than even my oldest had seen up until that point. And so that was important for me to model for them that, look, corporate is great and it's afforded us all of these things, but there are other pathways that you can pursue. At the end of the day, I'm telling you, one, you're going to graduate from college with zero in debt, because that's one of the things that I've been very purposeful about.
Nice.
Because I didn't want my kids to have the excuse that I had, which is, well, the job or the career that I found myself in is largely a result of I've got all of this debt that I've got to pay off and I've got all of these responsibilities. And I basically wanted them to have a clean slate so that they would have no excuse but to follow whatever it is that they're passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great, man. That's good. It's good stuff. I love these mindsets. So, while I would love to talk forever on the subjects of paradigms and mindsets, which are so important in what we're doing,
They are.
I also want to talk a little bit about some real estate. So, fast forward us to today, you are 130 something million dollars worth of assets under management, and you guys are cranking away. Acquired, a nice portfolio in the last, several years,
Yeah.
and now working on some 90-acre development. Maybe tell us what you're knee deep in right now, and how that got rolling.
Yeah. So for the last few years, so I got my first large scale deal. And what I tell people, and it's important for your listeners to know, is I was not an overnight success. So I didn't just decide I'm leaving corporate, I'm going into real estate, and then it just all started happening. From my first LOI that I submitted in 2019, it took me the better part of 2 years before I got awarded my first deal in the summer of 21. We ended up closing that deal, 244 units we acquired for 30 million, raised 8.25 million in equity. So that was my first sizable deal. The same week that we closed that deal, we were awarded a $40 million deal, 200 units. And so, law of the first deal that you've heard Michael Blanc and others talk about, that I lived that reality because I was knocking on the door for 2 years and no one was home. And then all of a sudden the door opened up wide and things started happening for me. And so acquiring multifamily, large scale multifamily, and then now making the transition to the world of development. And we started to talk about that, but a partner and I are developing a 90-acre parcel southwest of the Atlanta airport. It's a substantial development. It will ultimately, when it's all said and done, be comprised of about 115 housing units, about 85 single-family homes, some townhomes, some condo flats, and then about 30,000 square feet of mixed-use commercial retail space. There's also going to be a chef's incubator that will be at the center of this community. And it's an innovative community that is the vision of my partner. And I am hopefully instrumental in bringing that baby to term. And so we expect that that's going to probably be a 4-year development in multiple phases. But it's a new terrain for me, new learning curve, and that's really what gets me excited. And I love learning in a space that I'm passionate about.
All right, man, that sounds great. Congratulations on that. Sounds like quite a project. What let's talk about, for those that are new for the development world, right? So we've, us personally, we've been able to do entitle a 156 unit, multifamily development deal, which is straight from land and all the fun steps to entitle it to be ready to build. And then we've participated as a general partner in a 98 unit build to rent where we got the land entitled, started developing, have the first 8-ish doors built, and we're kind of now getting ready to do the next one. So we're not, the long-term tenured developers, but we're building our chops right over time.
Yeah.
So talk about how you got started. How did you jump in with legs first, both feet first, into a 90-acre development deal? And what does that actually mean for someone who has no clue? What the heck? How did you do that? And how do you get started? And what is it? Just crack that open, man.
So the first thing I would say is, one, I think I spoke it into existence because I had, whenever I have these conversations, invariably you'll get the question, so what's next, Clive? What are you going to do next? You're buying these large scale multifamily, but what are you going to do next? And my answer usually was, the next logical step is to get into development. And so that's something that I put out probably 2+ years ago, whenever I would get that question. And then the other key for me is relationships. So this partnership with my partner grew out of a relationship where we had a mutual friend who said to my partner, Dominique, you need to meet Clive. He's doing X, Y, and Z. And said to me, Clive, you need to meet Dominique. She's this powerhouse. She's the original founder of the Atlanta Food and Wine Festival. And she went on to sell that to a UK private equity firm. She's doing all these great things. And she has this idea about this culinary centric community. So that brought us together, but it started with a relationship. And, we started kind of filling each other out and establishing a relationship. And it turned out that, we were compatible as business partners. And ultimately, we just formalized that relationship and agreed to get into this project and help bring Dominique's vision to fruition. And so we're in the stage of having our site plan approved. The land's entitled. Our site plan's been approved. We're now at the phase of submitting our land disturbance permit next month, that being April. And we expect to be breaking ground and beginning the horizontal work in earnest this summer. And then ultimately move into vertical construction. And so it's a big project. Like I said, it will unfold over 4 years for the final nail to be hammered in. But it's really given me exposure to a part of commercial real estate that I had not had. And, there's the residential component, and then there's also the commercial mixed use component. So there's so much that I'm learning and kind of consuming, drinking from the fire hose some days. But it's really a fun experience.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, man. That's great. Clive definitely, is jumping in with both feet because there are a number of things that really have to happen, from feasibility study, the plans, the permits, the environmental, all of the financing, the construction, right? Just to get rolling. But, I think the mindset of it, that, Clive, the 4-year project starting now, everything you're doing is the ultimate value add, starting with the ground up and really turning a raw piece of dirt into, this is the vision, this is what we're going to go to. And I like the part where you talk about, networking and understanding, it's still about those relationships, right? So one introduction, one, opportunity, one partnership kind of opens up the potential to do other things. And so that's really awesome, man. It's a team effort.
You never know where those relationships are going to lead.
Yep.
And so I place a lot of emphasis on the importance of really making solid connections. It's not about the quantity, it's really about the quality of those relationships and that particular development really grew out of a connection that I made, and then I was able to build upon that. And so
Yeah,
I,
that's great.
I wasn't as skilled a networker and relationship builder in my corporate days, because I didn't really feel it was 100% necessary for me to be
Yeah.
successful on a day-to-day basis. But one thing I've learned very quickly, and you know this, Abel, is that relationships are at the heart of commercial real estate. Without them, you're not in the world of commercial real estate.
Yeah. Yeah. People, it's, people matter. Our interpersonal relationships, our tenants, the people that go to, to the actual properties that live there, our property managers, our legal experts, I mean, like all the way through. And then, not to mention equity and equity investors and the lenders, right? So like all the way through it, you got to have really good network, really good ability to at least, continue on that relationship with the most meaningful ones, and then be open to meeting new individuals that could take you to the next big thing, right? So that's great. Well, how are y'all structuring that deal? Like, let's say I'm an investor for it. How did y'all attempt to tackle the equity and debt for this deal?
Yeah, so it's like eating an elephant. So it's in small chunks. So it's really phases. So the first phase, and this is when I got involved, and this phase was already underway, was we did a Series A funding in connection with the acquisition of the land. So we first acquired the land. There was probably half a dozen individuals who were invited to be a part of Series A. And we then secured the land. We're now in the process of transitioning from the land acquisition to construction financing, and we're literally in the middle of those conversations now. And we'll do a Series B equity round in connection with that piece.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still determining whether or not we will have a institutional partner. We have conversations with a couple institutional partners who are willing to do substantially all of the equity that is needed for that phase. But we may also want to invite in some retail individual investors into Series B. But it's basically breaking it into the phases. The next phase will be the horizontals to get us to pad ready. Then once we get things pad ready, we'll pivot again and we'll transition into the vertical phase. And so at each one of those milestones, you have an opportunity to assess kind of what's the debt and equity need, and where are we, and kind of do a reevaluation of the whole project.
Yeah, one bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
I will give anybody that's listening, a piece of advice from our side. One of the first deals we did for the land entitlement was bring everyone in with equity. And I was like, yeah, we can, own the deal and kind of work it. Well, I've since, discovered that if you bring them in, our first investors, as debt, it's a way to keep more of the equity down the road. But Clive, you were at least smart enough to break it up into phases where I was like, yeah, let's do one big deal and put it all in. So anyways, it's been a learning experience for sure.
Yeah.
And we started about 3 years ago on one, and another one we're about a year and a half into it. So just grinding. You learn a little bit more every cycle, every year, every opportunity we get into, right? It's an opportunity to learn something.
The development is not for folks with short attention spans.
You got it. Yeah. You're in it. You're in it from the beginning to the end. So let's go. All right. Well, this is Clive. It's been awesome talking to you, and I wish I had two hours. We could probably dig into a lot more, but for now, let me at least give you an opportunity to tell our listeners who is it that you want to connect with. Maybe you can tell them a little bit more about who you want to reach out and where should they go. And if you say that out loud, it'll be down at the bottom of our show notes as well for them to contact you. So
yeah, absolutely. So the best way to connect with me is through my website. So if you go to parkroyalcapital.com, that's my website. You can find all of the other ways to get a hold of me. I'm active on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. But go to parkroyalcapital.com, and that's the best way to get a hold of me. If you want to book time with me, I pretty much on a daily basis, I'm having conversations with prospective investors, prospective partners, folks who just want to learn more about how I made the transition from, a corporate job and career to what I'm doing now. I'm open to having those types of conversations. I think it's a responsibility for each of us to each one teach one is kind of the background and kind of upbringing that I came out of. And so when you find something good that has potential value for others, it's your responsibility to share that. So I'm always open to having those conversations with folks.
All right, very good. That sounds awesome. And Clive, for our conversation, there's always something, that I realize, we didn't get to talk about A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Man, do you have any other, nuggets of wisdom, any last items, anything you were hoping to ask and I asked and I just didn't get to?
I think we touched on it most. From an advice standpoint, thinking about your listeners that are hearing this, I would just reiterate, and hopefully I'm not beating a dead horse, but the importance of stepping outside of your comfort zone and being willing to take a leap of faith. If you don't do that, you have no reason or no good reason to expect a different set of circumstances than whatever you've experienced to up until this point. And so, I would just encourage folks, the mindset thing, people kind of boo-hoo, mindset, but I would just tell you, you cannot underestimate the importance of that. If you have the right mindset, and the willingness to kind of step outside of your comfort zone, there's not much that you can accomplish in this space or any other space. So I would just reiterate and hammer home that point.
I agree 100%. For those that are listening that are kind of considering, taking some kind of leap, whatever your next step is, or whatever your leap is, or whatever your jump, whatever your risk, you can absolutely take the next step. You may fail, you may fall, you may hit an obstacle, you may hit a roadblock, but when those occur, you have the ability to bust through it, go around, jump over, whatever the means. And when you fall and you fail and you slip, it's not the end. It's just one misstep. You can get back up and get after it. So whatever you're shooting for, whatever you're trying to achieve, get after it, go do it. It is a mindset thing. You can do it. And I believe. So thank you very much, Clive. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. And thank you very much for showing up, man.
Thanks again for the invite and having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, for all of our subscribers, listeners, we appreciate you so much. Thank you very much for joining. You have supported the show and provided us, a ton of really good feedback. So we appreciate you. We're hundreds of positive reviews in writing, and I really appreciate it. If you can continue doing so, that would be awesome. Our downloads are hitting an all-time high right now. And so we just wanted to thank our sponsors as well, Anderson Advisors. We put together a specific link for you, anybody that's listening. If you guys want to, have some help, some advice, some insight, some guidance on structuring your corporation, making sure your taxes are good and well taken care of for the long-term future, aba.link/5talents. Anderson put together a really great tax and asset protection workshop just for you as listeners. So I wanted to thank our sponsors as well over at Anderson. And Clive, thank you very much for jumping in, and I appreciate it. And all of our listeners, we'll see you on our next show. Thank you. See you guys. Bye-bye.